Now, I know here's another topic that's not as big, I would say, but probably should be in some ways, is mold toxicity. And, I see it all the time here because we see a lot of Lyme patients come through our clinic. We see a lot of patients with just neurodegenerative diseases, autoimmune diseases, and almost always there's some part of it there that had to do with, mold toxicity. At one point I lived somewhere there was mold toxicity, and you hear this. It's this underlying trend, and you even dealt with mold toxicity. Can you
Oh
go a
yeah.
little bit into your own experience with it and what the research and what you found through really investigating it is the kind of biggest threat in mold and how to get over it?
Yeah. So mold, funny enough, is in terms of like the domain, they're eukaryotes. So we are eukaryotes as well. So funny, the fungi are related to humans in some way. But my experience with mold, I was around early sophomore year of high school where I first moved into this house in Jersey where it was all a basement. This is where I lived most of my time until I was 22 or so. And this basement just had really bad water damage. I mean, you could see the mold growing in the boiler room, in the bathroom, and so on. And I didn't know anything about this. I thought, okay, it's just mold. Nothing's going to happen. During those times in high school, I was one of the worst students in terms of academic grades. I did not get good grades. I had really bad ADHD. I could not focus for the life of me. I was disobedient to my parents. I was more of a person that didn't have their life together. I had Epstein-Barr virus infection. It turned out to be like a month-long mono. I would get regular strep throat infections, which are intricately related to mold. So all these things would happen, and I would never connect two and two because nobody ever taught me about mold toxicity. But the research clearly shows how mold interacts with our body, and it actually comes down to prokaryotes, including our mitochondria, which is an origin of bacteria. So prokaryotes are bacteria and archaea. Mold targets bacteria. I mean, this is how mold kind of evolved to have the abilities it has with mycotoxins. It wants to be able to what's called saprotriphise, where it breaks down things exogenously with enzymes. Where when we digest foods, we release enzymes endogenously. They release it exogenously into their environment to break things apart. And then from there, they consume it. To do that, they have to make sure that the environment they're in are free of other competing microbes like bacteria. And so they release mycotoxins, which are these volatile gases. They can release certain other compounds, toxins in general that destroy bacterial membranes, that destroy bacterial function. And so through this virtue, they target the mitochondria, being its bacterial in origin. And just by the action of mold spores being present or mycotoxin gas being present, they trigger what's called caspase enzymes in the mitochondria, which are the apoptotic enzymes. It tells your cells to self-destruct. And by that virtue alone, you start to lose cells. You can have hemolytic anemia, which is basically the destruction of red blood cells. You can have mitochondrial dysfunction as appearing as multiple different forms, as degeneration of the myelin sheath in the brain. And so you start getting brain fog, you start getting neurological conditions associated with mold. All of this because they target the mitochondria. But then there's also the other side of things in terms of immunology. They're just potent immunological tools. They can be used. I mean, they are used in war. They're used as this tool that can be extremely detrimental. In fact, they categorize it as a weapon of mass destruction that should not be used in war because of how detrimental they can be. That should tell you something about if you're living in a moldy environment, what it's doing to your health.
Yeah, and again, so many people just kind of overlook that. I almost feel like most houses shouldn't have basements. Sooner or
Yeah,
later, water gets in there, collects. It's just in the
exactly.
ground, right? And even the cleanest spots usually collect mold. So, thinking about, we probably freaked out a few people who live in a basement right now and thinking they have mold, and maybe they do. What can you do if you're that basement dweller, or even not, because mold could really be anywhere where there's any water, and especially if you have sheetrock, which is a great kind of conducer, I heard, of
Mhm.
mold. What can people do to basically try to alleviate some of the symptoms, reduce their mold exposure? What are some of the things you did, and what are some of the things that you researched about this?
Well, right off the bat, I'm going to mention a doctor named Dr. Richie Shoemaker. He is the leading investigator way before anybody else got on this on how mold and mold toxicity and sick building syndrome is what we call it, where the molds in the house can cause problems to people. So if anybody's hearing this, they should investigate Richie Shoemaker and what he has to say, because there's a lot more than I'm able to say right here. But my opinion, what he echoes as well is that if you can move out of your environment, do it, because you cannot get well in the same environment you got sick in. It's extremely tough to eradicate mold. In fact, eradicating it is probably next to impossible unless you demolish the house. Even if you were to do something like remediation on it, which is what most people do, they target the ventilation system, they use antifungals, it still wouldn't fix everything because the mold spores become embedded in the tissue or in the substance that they are found in. So it could be in your bed sheets, it could be in your books, it could even be in hard wood, because the way mold acts, I mean, if you look at it in a soil, you see just the mushroom on the top of the soil, but underneath the soil is all of these hyphae that are spreading out and starts to interact with other parts of the substance that they're in. And so because of the way mold utilizes these hyphae, they're going to penetrate anything and everything. So even if you cleaned your basement, you still have mold spores that are probably growing inside of the wood that may sooner or later come out. Even if you cleaned your bathroom, probably mold spores inside of the towels that will sooner or later come out. Because of this, getting out of the environment is important. The next thing is you want to treat mold as a toxin. And how do you work with toxins? You have to detoxify. So you want to work on liver health and gut health, because those two things are the ones that conjugate toxins to be excreted and then excrete those toxins effectively so they don't recirculate inside of your body. When you conjugate a toxin, if it's recirculated, once you get to the gut, it's free-forming. If it's recirculated, it becomes just as damaging, and it can cause problems for a lot of people. So utilizing binders, how you support your liver detoxification pathways, phase 1 and 2, are intricate. And on top of this, as you do so, you want to target mitochondria. You want to improve mitochondrial function, mitochondrial biogenesis. The same means by improving mitochondrial genesis, where you're creating new mitochondria, are also similar to the detoxification mechanisms. So by doing something like fasting, you improve and upregulate the phase 1, phase 2 detoxification, at the same time create new mitochondria that can help in pushing out these mold toxins, mold spores, and so on.